Hello. Wishing you a very happy new year, Richard.
Happy New
And
Year.
today I'm with Richard, who is a financial planning expert and a financial advisor for over 15 or 20 years. And recently, like today, we've come up with a topic, a very interesting topic, but it's related to inheritance tax, so which has been really in news in last quarter. There hasn't there were it was in news in terms of changes going to happen, but nothing has changed. But it's still there, and it's quite a nasty tax that is on your estate that when it's passed over. Um, there's something called trusts. A lot of businesses, a lot of individuals, or high net worth individuals use uh, to protect the family wealth and things. So, Richard, I would like to have your say on what do you think about it, and who is it for?
Yeah, I mean, look, thank you, Dicty. I mean, like you said, in the last quarter of 23, inheritance tax was quite a topical subject, really, and it looked like it was going to be tackled by the government, and it didn't. It didn't in the end. So whilst we still have we have the same situation where nothing's changed, the advice stays the same. That doesn't change. Only when something does change, then we tackle it, we start looking at it and start dealing with it. So it's business as usual, really, in terms of inheritance tax and trust planning around the question of inheritance tax. So let's really cover some basics, really. That's probably the best way to start. So there are nil rate bands that you have that you can offset against. Yep. So there are, generally speaking, as part of an estate, and every estate, whether it's you or I or anyone else, have nil rate bands, which is basically the first lot of money that you don't get charged inheritance tax on. Okay, that's probably the simplest way of describing it. Inheritance tax is 40%, so it's quite a large tax, and that's why we have things like trusts that we can put assets into from people's estates in order to protect it, in order to mitigate inheritance tax and reduce the amount of inheritance tax that estates pay. So the nil rate bands that you have basically are 325,000. Everyone gets that. Okay, so on the first £325,000, the estate won't get charged inheritance tax at 40%. If you have a property, and if that property if your share of that property is worth up to 175,000, then you can also get what's called the residential nil rate band on top of the normal nil rate band, and that's 175,000. So that's 500,000 that an estate can benefit from before it starts paying inheritance tax. Now, if you're married couple, for instance, you can pass each other's estates to each other tax-free, with backed up with a will, of course. And if you do that, then the survivor, the second spouse, and the survivor can then pass on £1 million worth of nil rate bands to whoever their beneficiaries are. There is a slight complication with the size of estates as well. So if your estate is worth more than, the net estate is worth more than 2,350,000, then you can lose the residential nil rate band altogether. So really, there's a lot of considerations. There's a lot of things that you have to consider, and when you're doing, when you're mitigating inheritance tax and doing trust planning. So it's quite a complex area, really.
Okay, so who needs them, and why do we need trusts?
Yeah, I mean, so touching on some of the points before, why do we need trusts? I mean, what we're doing by having a trust, what we can do is we can place assets from an estate into a trust. which in effect, it basically shields it from, inheritance tax, and it also improves the inheritance tax situation as well. So it stops estates from growing, okay, and it can also improve the inheritance tax position. And over a certain amount of time, or immediately, it can completely eradicate inheritance tax in some cases as well. So it's removing an asset from an estate into a trust for a beneficiary and trustees.
Yeah, so basically giving a wrapper to the assets into trust, so that it's not clubbed in. So if our trust goes over 2 million, 3 million pounds, we're going to lose all the allowances. So putting it in different wrappers like trusts would help reduce quite a bit of inheritance tax.
Well, absolutely, because it's not just the placement of an asset over, say, £1 million in your in the example that you've used. It's also the further growth that an asset benefits from inside an estate as well. So rather than an asset continuing to grow inside of an estate, it can grow inside of a trust, which is a lot more tax efficient.
Yeah. Okay. So what type of trust do people generally, are there like different types of trusts, and what kind are they used for such planning?
Yeah, so it's normally people that are in their sort of, I'll give you a long answer to a question like I always do, in true Richard fashion. It's normally not people that would normally take out the kind of trust that I deal with, that are investment-based trusts as well. It would be somebody typically in their 60s, 70s and 80s, even 90s. It's people that have generated a significant amount of wealth within their estates. They don't mind gifting a certain amount of that wealth. They don't necessarily need that money, or they might need it, but they might not need the growth from the asset. They might need to pull some of that money back over time, but they may not necessarily need the growth from it. So that's the start of the question, really. In terms of what type of trust there are, mainly the kind of trusts that I deal with where people invest money inside a trust would be a discounted gift trust or a loan trust. With a discounted gift trust, it's good because you are actually gifting money to the trust, which you can't get back, unfortunately. Once you've done it, that's it. It's not a flexible arrangement. Once you've done that, it then starts the 7-year rule ticking. Okay, we've all heard of this 7-year rule. When you gift an asset or you gift money, you have to survive 7 years in order to be no longer a potentially exempt transfer and potentially open to inheritance tax. Okay, so that's one advantage of a discounted gift trust. But you really want to, you don't really have the need for the money. That's what gifting it, but it has the advantage where you only have to survive 7 years for that to be not potential, getting tongue-tied, for that to not be subject to inheritance tax. A loan trust is more flexible. It's a lot more flexible. You can literally, what you can do is you're not gifting money, but you're making a loan to the trust that you can get back. Okay, and normally the way you would do it is that you would say loan, for example, £500,000, and you could take that. You could take that capital. It's a loan capital, so you still have the right over it. So you can take that back at 5% a year. So it's a great. So what you have to think of is that 500,000 that you've loaned to the trust, that's still inside your estate because the money hasn't been spent. But as and when you take 5% a year, that money is being spent. As long as it's spent, it's no longer part of your estate. So at 5% a year over 20 years, you've completely you've reduced the size of your estate by £500,000. So it's a gradual process of reducing the size of the estate, but it's allowing flexibility and having control over the capital that you're
Mhm.
investing within the trust, you see. And the beauty behind that, of course, is it's got major flexibility, but the money that's invested inside the trust is growing inside the trust, not inside the estate.
Right. So any growth on the like 500,000, whatever we've loaned into our trust, will go in the trust and go to the beneficiary straight away. That's not going to be subject to inheritance tax.
It's growing inside. It's growing inside the trust, yeah. And incidentally, as well, that money, that loan of 500,000, or capital as we call it, as you take it back, that's not subject to income tax. Taken at 5% a year, for example, it's not considered. It's not subject to income tax, so you're not going to get taxed on that money. So you could view it as kind of like an income that you're giving yourself it's not subject to income tax, which is a real benefit. It's a real benefit, and it's a cumulative allowance as well. So if you haven't taken any capital back in the first 3 years, where you could take 15% in one go, because that's your 3 lots of 5%, which adds up to 15, obviously. So it's a cumulative allowance as well, which makes it even better. But what you want to do with this kind of plan is you want to gradually reduce the size of the estate equally year on year, because then obviously that's more tax efficient by doing that.
Right. Okay. And I guess there are more ways, and depending on the situation of each client and individual, how the trust could be made and things worked around. So you individually help such clients, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there are other types of trusts as well, but they're the two main ones. I think they're probably the two most popular types of trusts that I deal with. Just to give everyone a bit of an example, a bit of a taste of how they might work. But there are other types of trusts as well, and it is a very complex area, and each solution really depends on the individual entirely. Based on what their objectives are, based on the size of their wealth, based on whether they need access to money or not. There are all sorts of things to take into account.
Okay. Yeah, sounds interesting. So I guess if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put in the comments, or I'll give you my contact details. Contact us, and I'll give Richard's contact to have like a one-to-one call with Richard to understand more in depth, because obviously it's quite individualistic advice. Just give a blanket advice to everyone. So but it's a kind of an area to think about trusts, and have to start thinking as soon as possible. Because the thing that the business, the property prices, they keep growing. You might not think you've got £2 million, but by the time it's passed on, it is over that. And then it's good to plan ahead, isn't it?
You'd be surprised, especially in our area, especially in Cambridge as well. It's property values are very high, extremely high, and it wouldn't take a lot to go over. Certainly to go over the £1 million mark, let alone, and also the £2 million mark as well. I've come across many clients that are in that situation, and it's that there are ways of becoming more tax efficient from an inheritance tax point of view, and the important thing is getting the advice, because for some reason access to financial advice isn't that easy for some, really. But it's a question of we need to make it a bit easier. We need to sort of, I think, there needs to be more of an effort to make ourselves known, really.
But yeah, I guess if anyone's listening to this video, please feel free to contact us, and Richard would be very happy to go one-to-one and talk through circumstances. And don't be afraid of contacting us.
Absolutely. I take out as much time as I need to talk to somebody, to help them, and to discuss their financial plans as well. I'm very happy to do that. It's really not a problem.
Okay. Thank you so much, Richard, and
Thank you.
we'll speak to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.